Good morning. All right, everybody stretch, move around. Glenn and I suffer from the same ailment. We don't manage time and use too many words. So I'm gonna do my best to shrink this message down, and for those of you guys that have kids, we'll get you out of here on time and all that type of stuff so that they're not sitting around waiting for you and all those moments. It's nice to be with you, and we get to talk about the Christmas story a little bit today, so I'm excited. You know, to begin with though, when I was 35 years old, I was working here, and I was in grad school at the time, finishing up a master's degree and staring at a lot of computer screens and a lot of PowerPoint presentations. Like, that's what my life felt like. And I noticed this thing because of how many screens I was staring at and how long, that I would stare at a screen. Maybe it was a PowerPoint presentation at the front of a classroom or my own computer, and all of a sudden all the words would just blur. And then they'd come back, and then they'd blur. And then they'd come back, and I was just like, that's not normal, right? Like, that's not supposed to be happening. And so I thought I should go to a doctor. So I went to the optometrist for the first time at the ripe old age of 35. That was the very first time I think I ever went to a legit optometrist. Before that, it had just been like the school checkup or maybe my primary care, just trying to make sure, you know, things are fine or whatever, but never like a legit full-scale eye exam. And I remember I walked in, and if you've got an eye exam, you know this. They do that machine where you put one eye up to it, and then they're like, when you see the little box moving around with the squiggly lines, click the button. That's what it was. I don't know what that's like for you. That's what I had to do. And so I put my one eye up, and it's moving around, and I click the button, and I click the button, and it goes fine. And then they're like, okay, switch eyes. And so we go to do the other eye. And I look through, and I'm ready to click the button, and then all of a sudden, the screen just goes black. And I said, I'm sorry, the machine turned off. Like, can you turn it back on, please? And the lady helping me goes, just don't worry about it, keep going. And I said, well, I can't keep going if the machine's not on. I can't click the button, so you might want to turn the machine on. She goes, don't worry about it, just keep going. And I thought, well, maybe this is a me moment, I don't know. So I closed my eyes to try to like reset. I think it's something I did, and I opened my eyes. Sure enough, screen's back on. And I'm like, oh, and I saw one of the moving boxes, and I click, and then it just goes black again. And I was just like, what is happening? And I met with the optometrist, and he told me that apparently I should have gotten prescription glasses or contacts 20 years earlier because I had a pretty significant astigmatism that had been affecting my vision. And my vision my eyes were working so hard for so long that apparently, and I didn't know this can happen, guys, your eyes can just fatigue where they decide we're not gonna do it anymore. Do you know that? So what was happening with the screen going black is one of my eyes was overcompensating, trying to balance this out to make this work so much that it was just shutting down. And then that's why I'd see things blurring out and back and forth and all this stuff. I had no idea, none. And my optometrist gave me a prescription, and then I got my glasses, and he just laughed at me and he goes, you're 35 years old and you've never had glasses on. He's like, you're gonna get to see a whole big wide world that you didn't know even exists that's out there. And I was just like, okay, you know, that seems dramatic. My vision's been fine my whole life. Like, I think this will be fine. And then I put my glasses on, and he was right. I walked out and I went home, and I remember looking at my wife after with glasses on for the first time. Guys, she has freckles on her cheeks. I had no idea. I just thought she had like blurry skin. I don't know what, like, I know that's not great to say, but like, I don't know. Like, I was just like, you have freckles and they're cute. You're adorable. And she's like, thank you. I wish you gotten glasses a long time ago. Like, guys, do you know that at nighttime, you can actually see the signs when they're far away? I thought driving at night was just an exciting thing we all did, and that the signs got clear when they were really close, and that you just got to have anticipatory, like, you know, in driving. And apparently you all can see all the time. I had no idea. I really didn't. I just thought that's how this was. You just drive that way. Without realizing it, I had let what I actually see in my very real life get smaller and smaller and smaller without even realizing it. And until I needed somebody else actually step in and remind me, no, put these on. And when we correct this, what you'll end up seeing is there's so much more there. The world is so much bigger than you ever thought. There's so much you've been missing when you narrow everything down into just the foreground. And I share this story with you. I know it's ridiculous, but it did happen. I share this story with you because I think that in some ways, we do the same thing with the Christmas story, with the birth of Jesus. And if you're like, well, what do you mean? Well, hang with me for a second. See, the Christmas story is really a great big story. I mean, if you're a Christian, the birth of Jesus is probably one of the most climactic events in human history, where essentially God becomes flesh. He draws near. And it's this profound moment. It's this really big moment where Jesus is born, the Son of God, drawn near, as if to answer the question once and for all. Is God far off? Is he in some other ecosystem watching us, or is he in it? Is he with us? Can he be near us? Is God with us? And that answer just gets definitively spoken, gets definitively said in the Christmas story. This is what we get with Jesus, the hope of the world, that you can actually have life and relationship with, in a dynamic with God, simply because Jesus makes his home among us. I mean, this is such a big thing. It is a big, big story that changed the entire world, and it's meant to be that big. It's meant to be a story that's big enough to be the hope and life and good news for the entire world. It's a huge story. And yet during this time of year, what often happens, and this is really normal, and it's not bad, it's good, we get excited for Christmas. And we find ourselves, maybe you're like me, and you're like, well, I'm really excited about these traditions and these moments and these things in my life. And so we tend to get excited about that. And what can happen is that great big story, just accidentally or without even knowing it, can start to shrink to get a little smaller. And not because any of those things are bad, they're good. Like, think of some of the things. We get excited to get food and celebrate with people we love. That's a beautiful thing. You shouldn't feel bad about that. That's amazing. We get excited to give and receive gifts with the people that we care about, that we know. That's a good and beautiful thing, right? That's amazing. I hope you get to do that. Some of us get excited to decorate. Others don't. To put up a tree, to light up the yard, to do all those things, right? We get excited about that. We might even get excited to go to, if you're in Tucson, to go to Winter Haven or walk your neighborhood or something, because this is our city and this is our community and we want to be a part of that. Or we get excited to go to our church to experience the Christmas service for us and our families and each other. And we get excited about those things. That's good and beautiful. It's normal. But what can happen is you start to do this stuff year after year. Moment after moment, and it starts to be where those things kind of make their way, where it's like, well, these are my favorite things, and these are the things I love the most, and these really good and beautiful things start to happen, and it can almost be like the Christmas story, this amazing story that's an absolute gift for the whole world, not just your circle, the whole world, just accidentally can start to shrink down and get a little bit smaller than it actually is. And you know what my hope is for us today? My hope is that maybe today I can just, like my optometrist did, I can just hand you a pair of glasses, metaphorically, so to speak, where you can put those on and go, oh my gosh, this story's still there. I love what I was seeing in the foreground, but now I see it all, and the story's so much bigger. In fact, this is actually the good news that's there for the whole world. And you know why that matters? Do you know why I hope that you see that? Is because me, you, us, the church, we actually still have a role to play, where we make this story known to the larger world around us, because it's not just our story, is it, friends? It is a story so big, a story so climactic and so powerful, a story so life-changing and a story so important that anything smaller than the whole world simply won't do. It's meant to be that big. And so we're gonna talk about that. I hope you come to see the bigness of the Christmas story, and that gets to flow through your life, perhaps into someone else's life. And the way we're gonna do this is we're gonna look at the role of the three wise men. And if that comes as a surprise to you, it did to me too. We'll explain that as we walk through this today. But I want you to turn in your Bibles to Matthew chapter 2. The three wise men in the book of Matthew, they help us essentially to see just how big the story of Christmas really is, and that it's actually good news that's big enough to reach the world. Now, you find the three wise men in Matthew chapter 2, but I think if you turn right there, we're gonna miss something really important that I want you to see about what Matthew's trying to do. So turn to Matthew chapter 1, and I promise we'll get to them in just a moment. And let's talk about Matthew. So Matthew is it's the first book in your New Testament. You know, when you open your New Testament, there's 4 books, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and those books all talk about the life of Christ, and they're referred to often as the Gospels, and so Matthew is one of them. And if you've ever wondered why they're kind of written a little bit differently, or they describe things a little bit differently, it's because each one of those books is actually that author writing to a different audience. And you know this, the audience you're speaking to changes the way you want to convey your message, because you're trying to speak to them, not just to anyone or any moment, and so you tailor it to that. Take the Gospel of John, for example, right? Many of us are familiar with John 3:16. For God so loved the world. We know that verse, right? That's written by John. John is writing to a Greek audience. He writes to all of us, but his focus is to a Greek audience. That's why when John wants to talk about the birth of Jesus, he starts with Greek philosophy, and he uses a word familiar to the Greeks called the logos, which is the idea of the truth, or the very essence of truth itself. And here's how John describes the birth of Jesus. He says, and the word, the logos, became flesh and dwelt among us. Because he's writing to that Greek audience. That's what John does. Well, Matthew, who we're going to read today, Matthew's different. Matthew writes to a very Jewish audience. He writes to a very Jewish audience. And so he doesn't start with Greek philosophy. When Matthew begins his gospel, he starts with the genealogy of Jesus. This is how Matthew, when he sat down as an author and goes, how do I want to start this book? How do I want to start this depiction of the life of Christ? He's like, I know what verse I'm going to start with. This one, Matthew 1:1. The book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Now, I don't know if you're like me. Have you ever had a moment where you're reading through your Bible and you get to one of those genealogies and it's like, and this person, the son of this person from this land who birthed these 3 children, who was the son of this person, who married this person, and it goes on for like a page. And I know you're supposed to go, and it's like the most powerful thing because it's the scripture, but you also just flip the page and you skip it. Do you know what I'm talking about? And it's because as people who live right now in the year 2025, we're not, in Western culture in particular, we're not necessarily wired to just love genealogies and to love that. And that's because we're not first century Jewish people. Because in the first century, and historically for Jewish people, the genealogy matters a ton. This was very, very important to them. And who's Matthew's audience? Jewish people. So he starts with a genealogy because the Jewish people, for a very, very, very long time, had been living in expectation that one day the Messiah would come. And this idea of a Messiah, it's a savior, it is a king. It's the person who's going to step into the midst of our world. And essentially, if whatever's upside down, it's going to go right side up. Whatever's disconnected is going to reconnect. Whatever needs to happen is going to happen. And they're waiting for this person to come along and set the record straight and to move them forward and lead them forward. This King of Kings to come along. And they had stipulations about this because of the scriptures, because there were moments in the scriptures where it was like, that Messiah needs to be a child of Abraham. That's what needs to happen. Because way back in Genesis, God promised Abraham one of his descendants would be a blessing to the whole world. And so, okay, that Messiah is going to come from Abraham. But also, that Messiah needs to be a son of David, because promise to David that his throne would be eternal and everlasting, and one day there would be a Messiah who reigns on the throne of David forever, and that this is going to happen. And so that Messiah also needs to be from the throne of David. So Matthew, I know we want to roll our eyes back, but Matthew, when he starts his gospel, as he writes to this Jewish audience, he goes, I need you to see that all the way from Abraham, where, the father of us is Judaism, and all the way through David and all the way into the present day, we now have Jesus. And what Matthew is essentially doing is he's going, hello, my fellow Jewish people. He checks all of the boxes. Like, this is who he came through, and this is what it means, and this is what this is, and all the expectations and all of the things. And this is why there was so much hope in who this person would be and what might actually happen. And he's saying, this is our guy. That's what he's saying. Matthew starts his book by going, I need you to see, this is the one that we've been waiting for. This is our Messiah. This is our tradition. This is our scripture for our people and our community. This is our guy. He's our Messiah. And that's how he opens up his book. And then he goes straight on from the genealogy of Jesus to detail the birth of Christ. And even in the birth of Christ, he starts quoting moments from the Old Testament to say, this is to fulfill that. This is it. Look at Matthew chapter 1, verse 22 through 23. It says, and he describes the birth of Christ, and he says, all this took place to fulfill what the Lord had spoken by the prophet. Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and they shall call his name Emmanuel, which means God with us. Do you see what Matthew's doing? Again, he's going, hey, Jewish people, my audience that I'm writing to. Jesus fits our scriptures. He fits our traditions, our expectations. He's our Messiah. He checks the boxes. This is our story. This is our guy. This is our moment. That's chapter 1. And then we essentially get to chapter 2. You turn the page, if that's where it is in your Bible, but you go to chapter 2 and you suddenly realize, and now we're just going to shift to 3 foreign kings and an angry king named Herod. Like, we're just going to jump away from the Jewish story right away, and now we're talking about 3 kings from the east, 3 wise men from the east who followed a star to meet an angry king, and the story starts to get a little weird. This is the story of the 3 wise men. Matthew chapter 2, verses 1 through 3. It says, now after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him. But when Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all of Jerusalem with him. The reason he's troubled is because he's not a great king, he's a controlling king. And when he hears that somebody has been born King of the Jews, he hears that there's a contention for his power someday, a contention for his moment. So do you know what Herod does? It's in the text. If I could read the whole thing, we would. He essentially says, okay, well then I'm going to essentially have every male child under the age of 2 in Bethlehem killed because we know the Messiah is going to come from Bethlehem. So that's what's going to happen. And an angel of the Lord goes to Mary and Joseph and says, you and Jesus got to get out of here and go hide in Egypt. And that's what happens. That's essentially the way this story unfolds. And the wise men play this role of essentially telling Herod, okay, we are come to see the King of Kings. Now, like many of you, think about this for a moment. How many of you, and you don't have to raise your hand, but grew up with like a nativity in your house? Maybe you had one in your front yard. Maybe your neighbors had one in your front yard. I don't know, there's so many of us. Or maybe you've just walked Winter Haven at some point or someplace and you're like, yeah, that's what a nativity is. Like you can see it in your head. I've seen thousands of nativities at this point. We have one in our home that's like one of those where you collect a piece every year, you know, those types of things. And so I have all of these images in my head. I don't know if you're like you, but we become pretty familiar with this. Think about it for a moment. For me, a common nativity scene is often a delivery room known as a stable, because that's what every woman wants, right? And then in the middle of it is a manger with Jesus. And then Mary, who's just had a baby, is on her knees just smiling, because that's what every woman who's just delivered a child would do, is kneel down in hay in a stable and smile at a child in a manger. And then Joseph's usually kind of standing back, which that makes sense. I get that part. And then, because I've been there and it's a lot, right? And then there's always livestock. There's a sheep somewhere, and that's because there's shepherd, because every delivery room needs livestock. It's not the same, and we need that level of cleanliness in that situation. And then there's a shepherd with a staff and with the crook on it, and maybe there's a couple. There's usually an angel because they announce the birth and they're celebrating. There's a star, and then oftentimes there's these 3 wise men that are standing there too, and sometimes we even introduce a camel because sheep are not enough livestock. We need bigger animals and we need more in that beautiful delivery situation, right? And it's all there. That's the nativity. It's all there, and they're all just kind of admiring Jesus in this moment. That's what I grew up with. That's what I knew. And so because I've seen so many nativity scenes, and maybe you're like me, I grew up thinking that the role that the wise men play, the reason why they're in the book of Matthew, the reason why we sing a song, the reason why we know about them, is because they were eyewitnesses to the birth of Jesus. Like they came, they were there. They're a part of the nativity scene. They're pushing shepherds out of the way for a better view, right? They're there. And then, guys, this moment happened where someone ruined this whole thing for me, and I'm going to do this same thing to you today, where I went to Bible school. I went to Bible college to get my Bible degree and try to get into ministry, and I found myself as a first-year student in a Greek class, and my Greek professor said, hey, I want you all to turn to the book of Matthew, and we're going to look at the birth of Jesus. And I thought, that's really cool. That's amazing. And then he said, particularly, let's go to the moment with the wise men. Right? And he had us read this passage out of Matthew chapter 2, 10 through 11. And he said, let's see if you notice a problem. That's what he asked us. I'll read it to you. He says, when they saw the star, and this is what most of us think of about the wise men, this passage. When they saw the star, they rejoiced exceedingly with great joy. And going into the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother, and they fell down and worshiped him. Then opening their treasures, they offered him gifts, gold and frankincense and myrrh. Right? This is the story that most of us think of and that most of us know. My Greek professor looked at us and said, does anyone see a problem with most people's nativity sets or most people's nativity scenes as we think about them? And then he said, I want you to go back and focus in on verse 11 where it says, they saw the child with Mary and his mother. And all of us as Greek students started looking at this, and particularly looking at that word, the child. Now you realize when in Greek you want to write that a child was a baby, there's one word that you use. But when in Greek you want to write that a child was a toddler, there's another word that you use. And which word do you think is used here? It's not the one for baby. It's the one for a toddler. He goes, so what do you think? What do you realize as you read this? And somebody's hand shoots up and immediately is like, the wise men weren't there for the birth of Christ. And he goes, exactly. And that moment, I don't know if that bothers you or not, that blew up my brain for some reason. I don't know why that did, but I was just violated by that for some strange, I was just like, what do you mean it's not there? What do you mean they weren't there standing there? Like I've seen nativity scenes. I have one in our house. It's all a throne of lies. What is this? I didn't know what to do with it, and I was kind of frustrated because for me, when I heard that, I suddenly found myself thinking, well, then what's their point in the story? Because I'd always thought that the wise men, the role they play in the book of Matthew is they were eyewitnesses to the birth of Jesus, and that they came led by the same star and all this stuff, and they gave him gifts because he's a king, but like that's what their role was. So if they're not there for that moment, and if they're there later when Mary and Joseph are like tired and in a house and doing whatever, and they just show up with their entourage and give them, I don't understand why this exists in the story. Like, I really don't. To the degree, guys, and I don't know if you remember what it was like being a first-year college student in whatever subject you studied, but you know how you go away with just enough adulthood and you learn just enough things to like know everything that everyone else needs to know? And I came back, and I absolutely ruined a trip to Winter Haven that year because that was always a tradition. We'd go through that neighborhood and look at lights. And I remember walking through, and every time I'd see a nativity scene, I'd look to the person next to me and go, actually, do you know they weren't really there? Every single time. And I did quote the movie Elf at one point in time, standing in front of a house. I actually yelled out, "You sit on a throne of lies," because that's what Christmas needed. That's what it meant to live out the birth of Jesus and during that season of time. It's terrible. I'm embarrassed about it. But it really did. It messed with me where I was just like, this story got rocked somehow. And can I tell you how I found myself thinking? I found myself thinking if I was an editor when Matthew wrote this text, and he submitted this to me. And he was like, hey, I need you to look this over for me really quick. And he said, and I was like, who's your audience? And he goes, oh, the Jewish people. Like, that's who I'm writing to. And I said, okay, cool. And I'd read Matthew chapter 1 and I go, oh yeah, that checks out. That's amazing. You did such a good job. And then I'd get to chapter 2 and I'd be like, what's with these foreign kings? You don't need them. And this is the honest truth. If I looked at this, all I would do is I go, Matthew, you should cut them out and just start this way. And Herod discovered that that the Messiah had been born in the town of Bethlehem. And so he sought to eliminate the children in Bethlehem. And the angels came and they essentially told Mary and Joseph that they need to go hide in Egypt. Like, you don't need this moment, right? If that's your audience, I don't know why that's important. That's what I honestly thought. I'm not saying that's true, and I'm not saying that's good. It's just what I honestly thought. Right. Same year, I found myself in a New Testament class. And as I'm sitting in this New Testament class, my professor was a Jewish man. His family is from Israel, and he actually came to faith by studying Messianic scriptures and just fell in love with Jesus all over again and then became a professor out of this. It was like a really beautiful, beautiful thing. And as he's talking with us, he said, I want us to turn to the book of Matthew today because he writes primarily to a Jewish audience. And we said, sure. And as he started to talk about the birth of Jesus, he made this statement where he said, I believe that the section about the wise men might have just have been one of the most important things that Matthew chose when writing about the birth of Jesus Christ. And because of where I was and what I had been thinking and where my head and heart space was, I was floored. And I immediately was like, can you explain? As though he was just gonna leave that like a cliffhanger for me in class and be like, you can go now, right? And so he said, sure, absolutely. And he said, Matthew's writing to a Jewish audience, and so you have to understand the way that they looked at the world in the first century and what was going on with them. And he started to explain this, and he said, in the first century, for the average Jewish person, you could put every human being into one of two categories. Every single human being on the planet fit in two boxes if you're a Jewish person in the first century. There were Jews and there were Gentiles, which is a word that means everyone else, not Jewish, is essentially the way that goes. You could literally fit the entire known world into those two boxes. There's us, and then there's everyone else. There's those of us who are in the middle of this story, a part of the story of God, followers of the one true God, people of the covenant, and then there's everyone else. And he said, and essentially too, if you think about the cares of the people in the first century, you've got the Jewish people who are being oppressed by the Romans at that point in time because they've been conquered and are living under the thumb of Rome and heavy-handed and all of this stuff. And so they cared a ton about their land and getting their rights and their government and all of this stuff back. But he goes, you have to understand, do you know how big the nation of Israel actually is? Like, do you know how big Israel really is? And none of us did. And he said, it's roughly the size of the state of New Jersey, which that blew me away, just to think about it in that terms. And if you're not great with your state sizes and different thing, he said, it's about 275 miles long, and then east to west, it's about 80 miles wide. And I'm from Arizona, so there's a part of me that just looks and I'm like, I could drive that distance, and what am I in Flagstaff at that point in time? Like, I'm still in my same state, and I got a long way to go. Like, there's so much land mass That doesn't seem very big. That seems kind of small. And he goes, exactly. And yet there were so many cares and so many things with this. It can start to feel like the whole world was about this one story, about their moment, about this land, about these people, about this thing. And he goes, and it's big. It is a huge story. It's an important story, because he wouldn't minimize any of that. He's talking to a Jewish man whose family still lives in Israel, right? But he goes, but the thing is the world can shrink really, really fast. And he goes, Matthew from the very beginning reminds them, through the wise men, that this story is for them, but that it's also way bigger than them. And he writes this to a group of Jewish people, and he puts it right there in the midst of chapter 2, right at the very beginning of his gospel, because he wants that story, that picture, to be that big. See, guys, God from the very beginning had promised Abraham that one day one of his descendants would come and be a blessing to the entire world. And Matthew uses 3 foreign kings who travel from far and wide, outside of the story that was being told, outside of the understanding that was even happening there, because God did something in their midst as they followed a star to make their way there. And he uses these 3 kings in the story to remind us that this isn't just a story for Jerusalem, and this isn't just a story for the nation of Israel, but that this is a story that's big enough to fit us all in. It's a story that means something for the entire world, which means it's big enough for you and big enough for me. And Matthew tells us in chapter 1 that they called Jesus Emmanuel, which means God with us. And essentially the Christmas story, friends, is a declaration that the God of the universe is not far off, but drawn near to be with you. You can actually have relationship. He wants relationship with you. But in chapter 2, he also reminds us that God is loving the people of this world that we do not always see. That God is working in the hearts of people that are often outside of our story, outside of our circle. Right? Because like us, he wants them to know that they are loved and known by the God of the universe too. So you might think about this for your own life. These 3 kings represent the person in your neighborhood that you never really talk to because you don't have a lot in common, or you just haven't had that moment. They're outside your circle. They're outside your story, but the story of Christmas is theirs too, isn't it? It's big enough for them too. The 3 kings represent the person in your workplace that for whatever reason you just don't partner with or get to know really very well. Maybe your paths don't cross. Maybe they're different than you. I don't know what it is, but they're just outside your story and they're outside your circle. And so you never really pay attention. And yet God wants to unfold them into his story and into his circle, because the Christmas story is large enough for them too. The 3 kings represent the person in your city, in our towns, in our communities. They're the baristas in our coffee shops. They're the cashiers in our grocery stores. They're the first responders in our neighborhoods. They're the business people. They're the stay-at-homes. They're the everyone around us that exists outside of our story, outside of our circle, and yet they're part of the circle of God because his story is big enough to be good news for the whole world. The 3 kings are people from different cultures and backgrounds and customs and families, right? Who still have hearts that long to know the God of the universe, that still have hearts to connect with God and to know that he has drawn near to them in these particular moments. Think of what the kings, these 3 kings, these 3 wise men in the book of Matthew say. It's right there in verse 2, chapter 2, verse 2. They've come in search of the King of the Jews. Why? That we might worship him. These aren't 3 low people. These are 3 people who would have come with entourages. They're 3 people who would have either at the minimum been very wise men and esteemed men from their cultures, at maximum been kings from their cultures. And yet these kings, these rulers, these people are looking for the King of Kings because they too have a longing in their heart to know that there's a God who's drawn near, who's been born among us. They go to worship him, to pay him reverence and to encounter him. And they traveled from far and wide. And think of how little they traveled on. A star. Guys, come on. How many of you won't leave the house without your GPS to go somewhere these days? A star? If I was like, yeah, you were looking at the stars, you're like, there's a new one, and I think that signifies something. We should just follow it to unknown lands, to unknown places, to unknown kings to look for a baby. That is the worst location device I've ever seen in my life. I don't trust that. But they do, because their hearts long for that, and God does something amazing, and he moves in them, and he leads them forward. And so, friends, the question I want to ask each of us today is, has the Christmas story in your life, in your own life, is perhaps it shrunk down to the size of your own traditions and your own expectations, which, as I said before, and I'll say it again a bunch, it's not bad. Those are good and beautiful things. You should hold on to those and do them. They are not bad. You shouldn't feel bad about it. But has the story shrunk to be about that size? Or when you think of the Christmas story in your life, is it still the great big story that is the hope and good news for the world of a God who's drawn near and meets people wherever they are? You know, these next couple weeks, what would happen? What would happen if you let the story get as big as it actually is in your life? Maybe there's someone in your life right here and right now that is outside your story, is outside your circle. And they need to know that there's a Christmas story for them too. They need to know that there's a God who meets them where they are too. After all, a story that started with a Jewish baby born in Bethlehem, encountered by three outsiders, three wise men from places that existed outside the Jewish story, found themselves moved and inspired to encounter the God of the universe, Jesus, and worship him. And you know what? Can I share this with you? I'm so thankful that Matthew includes this story, because when I think about this story and I try to put myself in it, do you know which character in this story I am? I'll tell you, I wasn't born historically Jewish. I'm not born genetically Jewish. That's not my background, which means what? I'm one of the people in the other box. I'm outside the story. I am Gentile. I am one of the three kings. That's who I am, who finds my way in this. And because at some point in time, somebody in their life realized that this great big story, this Christmas story and the birth of Christ and the God draw near was big enough to share that same thing with me and invite me and include me to be into it. I actually get to be here teaching and sharing in this moment with you. You are all here most in part because you were all one of the kings at one point in time that somebody looked at and said, but come and meet the King of Kings. That you might know the good news, that you might have that. And we, friends, still have a role to play. We still have a story to tell. If you want to step into the larger story of Christmas, then open your eyes and your heart this year, and I challenge you to do this in the next couple of weeks, to include someone in your story, right? It might seem weird or big to go, how do I make the story as big as I can? One just really practical step is just look outside your circle, look outside your story, and maybe there's somebody there that God's brought into your life that you can include, that you can unfold into that larger story, because there's a Christmas for them too. There's a Christ for them too. When I was going to school and living in Chicago, I used to serve meals on Thursday nights at the Lawson City YMCA in downtown. And I would go into the cafeteria of my college, and they would make meals for all the students, but they'd make extras on Thursday nights, and they'd load it all up into these trays and things, and then we'd put them on carts, and then we'd wheel those a couple city blocks down to the Lawson YMCA, where we would serve meals to a whole group of people that essentially were living at the Y. It was a very large building. I forget how many stories tall this thing is and how many people it housed, but there are people in housing programs or people in back to work programs, but who were needing some kind of assistance or short-term assistance to essentially, navigate a really difficult moments in life. So they were there trying to get back on their feet, and we'd show up with meals on Thursdays. And that's what we'd do. When we show up there, anywhere from, 40 to 70 people we'd feed, and then we'd eat dinner with and get to know people on these Thursday nights. And I loved it. But there was one night of the year where 100 plus people would show up. And it was the last time we would do this before Christmas. And I loved it because the cafeteria people, they knew that we would do this. They knew it was a big celebration. And so they would make a steak dinner for all of these people, make a steak and scalloped potatoes and vegetables. Some of you guys, it's too late to talk about this. You're getting hungry right now. But they'd make all this really good and beautiful and amazing food. And then they'd load it up. We'd load it up in the carts and we'd go. And on that particular night, we'd sing songs together. We'd serve meals. We'd sit and just celebrate and have a great time. It was a really beautiful time for all the people that were part of the WISE program. And on this one particular Thursday, on this one particular year, I was in a bit of a hurry. And the reason I was in a bit of a hurry is because I had another tradition happening at the exact same time. And I was on a dorm floor with 30 guys who lived on my floor. And once a year, we would do this thing called rib night. And I know that some of you are like, really, that's the big deal? It was rib night? I think if you think that, you forget what it's like to eat ramen and essentially pancake mix all of the time. Rib night was a big deal where we felt like we were eating like kings. And even more than that, at the beginning of the year, we would contribute to what was called floor funds in case we broke anything that needed to be replaced. And if we were great and we didn't break anything, all of that money bought more ribs. And on this year, we did so good. And so there was going to be this huge feast of rib tips and all this stuff from one of Chicago's best barbecue places. And we were so excited. And so I am trying to finish up at the Lawson YMCA as we're, serving these meals and we're eating with people and hanging out, and it seems like it's settling down and it seems like it's over, and I'm like, okay, let's go. I got to pack up. I got to get to rib night. And the other 3 volunteers with me are like, what's rib night? I was like, it doesn't matter. Get your stuff, I got to go. And so I pack up all these things and we load up all the carts, and I'm going to push it back to my college and wheeling this thing along, and we go outside and starting to make our way back home. And as we're wheeling this along, there's a man who's sitting outside of the building, outside of the Lawson YMCA, and he looks and he says, hey, Merry Christmas, y'all. That's all he says. And I'm just like, cool, Merry Christmas. And all of a sudden, one of the volunteers, her name was Crystal, she stops me and she goes, hey, can you wait a minute? And I was like, did you forget something? And she's like, no, can you just wait a minute? And then she runs over to the cart and she grabs a plate and she puts steak on it. And she puts scalloped potatoes on it. She puts vegetables on it. She puts food on it. And she runs over to the man and she hands him the plate and she goes, Merry Christmas to you too. And then his eyes well up with tears. And he says, I tried to get in to have dinner tonight, but I'm not a part of a Y, so they wouldn't let me in. And he says, but because of you, I get to have Christmas too. Merry Christmas. And she said, Merry Christmas to you. Jesus loves you. And then comes back and goes, okay, we can go now. And went back to rib night. Now guys, I went back and I probably stuffed my face with ribs, but can I tell you, I don't remember. I don't remember who I sat next to at rib night. I don't remember how much I ate or what I did or didn't. I don't remember what we talked about. I don't remember anything really about that night. But do you know what I can't get out of my mind? You know what's seared inside of my brain like an image to take with me for life? That man's face when his eyes lit up and filled with tears. And he said, because of you, because you saw me, I get to have Christmas too. Thank you. That's like a fixture inside of me. See, there's something amazing that happens. Oftentimes we get these moments, just like I did, but I have my traditions and my moments and my things and all this stuff. And the story just starts to shrink down and we miss that there's people outside our story. We miss that there's people outside of our circle, outside of our normal paths and things that are actually right there. And Christmas is for them too. The message of Christ that God actually loves him and wants to meet him is with him too. And sometimes that's just communicated through a plate of food and a Merry Christmas and a Jesus loves you. Right? Sometimes it's communicated through moments in our workplace. We miss these moments, and yet if you let yourself put on these glasses and remember just how big the story really is, and you live your lives these next couple of weeks with your eyes and your heart wide open because of what God's done in you, you get to be one wise person who meets other wise people and shows them how to find the King of Kings. And shows them that there's a Christmas story still there for them. And shows them that they are loved and that God is not far off in their universe, but ultimately is with them and as close to them as they could possibly be and wants to meet them in the midst of whatever they are. You get to be hope and good news and a gift. And that, friends, is the heart of what we celebrate at Christmas because the story is too big to just be our story. It's a great big story.